Who is Legolas? Is he more than just the stereotypical elf most see him as? What was Tolkien's purpose in creating the character? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we cover The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, and other great fantasy books and TV shows like The Witcher. Welcome. So, who is Legolas? He is introduced as a strange elf clad in green and brown. Legolas, a messenger from his father, Thranduil, the king of the elves of northern Mirkwood. And sure enough, the only substantive contribution we have from him at the Council of Elrond was a brief account of how Gollum managed to escape imprisonment in northern Mirkwood. He was then selected by Elrond to be a part of the Fellowship to be a representative of the elves, rather than because of any particular abilities over and above the other elves that he might have had. So, what made him appear strange to Frodo on first meeting him? Well, Frodo had met quite a few elves by that point. Gildor and his company in the Shire, Glorfindel, Elrond and the denizens of Rivendell, most of whom were of Noldorin descent. But Legolas was the first elf he had probably met from Mirkwood. Although we might think of all elves as being quite similar in Tolkien's world, they really weren't. There were many subtle differences, cultures and groupings, and as you would expect from a philologist, quite a few different elvish languages. The elves of northern Mirkwood were what we might colloquially call wood elves, rather than high elves. Hence Legolas being dressed in green and brown being highlighted immediately. To Tolkien, they were sylvan, though Legolas himself, coming from the royal line, was technically a Sindar. Exactly how long he had lived there is a matter of some conjecture, because elves don't age like humans do. Tolkien doesn't tell us exactly how old he is, but we do know that he refers to the other members of the Fellowship, Gandalf aside, as children, talks about having seen trees grow from seed to death, and so on. The official movie guide to The Lord of the Rings has him down as 2,931 years old, although the writers freely admit that they made this number up. What we can say is that by human standards at the time of The Lord of the Rings, he had lived a very long time, although many other elves still considered him youthful. Very probably he was born in the early part of the Third Age. What this means is that for most, if not all of his life, Legolas will have lived in northern Mirkwood with limited contact with the outside world. The woodland realm had once covered all of that great forest, but when Sauron installed himself in Dol Guldur, calling himself the Necromancer, the elves abandoned the southern part of the forest. Their new home was a cave system under a wooded hill on the northeastern end of the forest. Those elves mostly kept themselves to themselves, being distrustful of dwarves but trading amicably if distantly with the humans living in Lake Town. They had strained relations with Lothlorien to the extent that Legolas, despite being the king's son and it being the closest other elven realm, had never been to Lothlorien. They still spent time out in the forest, but even the northern parts were slowly coming under the influence of Sauron. Orcs and giant spiders were spreading their nests throughout the woodland. The once mighty woodland kingdom was looking less and less mighty by the year. Their culture was not rustic per se, but simple and more natural. Their soldiers had light armour rather than finely crafted plates and chains. They preferred forest life and cave systems over sunlit uplands and buildings. Think arts and crafts over even light industry. We first encounter this enclave of elves in The Hobbit. The dwarves and Bilbo head off along the forest path through Mirkwood. They see the fires and sounds of the Council of Elves, stray off the path and get themselves caught. Legolas will almost certainly have been there at the time, so although the films took some liberties in making Legolas such a central character in the Hobbit movies, they weren't completely making it up. The Elf King we see there isn't named in The Hobbit, but he is Thranduil, and he is Legolas's father. So that perhaps is the first thing that makes Legolas special. He is not just a random elf, he is the son of a king. After the dwarves escape, and after Smaug is killed by Bard, the elves, presumably again with Legolas among them, come to the aid of the humans of Lake Town, their trading partners. They demand a share of the wealth of Erebor from the dwarves, who were once their prisoners, and now were residents of the mountain once more. It's only the arrival of Gandalf, Bilbo's sneaky diplomacy by theft, and the arrival of a common foe in the goblins and wargs that prevents the two sides going to war with one another. I say this not just to remind you of what happened in The Hobbit, but to point out that when Legolas and Gimli meet and don't get on initially, this is more than just an ancient grudge between races. Legolas's father imprisoned Gimli's father, and the two of them were very nearly at war with one another. The elves of Mirkwood reappear in the story right before the main events of The Lord of the Rings. Aragorn captures Gollum and leaves him in the care of the elves of northern Mirkwood, but Gollum escapes with the help of an orc raid, which is why Legolas is at the Council of Elrond in the first place, to report in that they have lost Gollum. Of course, after that, Legolas becomes a part of the Fellowship, and from then on, Tolkien largely uses him as what he is, a representative of the elves. He does all the things you would expect an elf to do. He sees things from afar, Etheras birds in flight and so on. He's light on his feet, remembers things from long ago, is good with his bow, all the things that have become a part of every elf trope in countless epic fantasy series ever since. And why shouldn't he be like that? He has grown up among elves and known little outside his homeland realm. But that is when it gets really interesting, because Tolkien starts to show the impact on Legolas of moving out beyond his own land and experiencing new people and cultures. Legolas changes through this story, which, for someone as many centuries old as he is pretty impressive. First, there is his fate. When Gandalf returns as Gandalf the White, he doesn't just reappear in Fangorn Forest. He starts up on the mountaintop, then is taken by Gwaihir the Great Eagle to Galadriel, and only then goes to Fangorn to meet Aragorn, Gimli and Legolas. And he brought with him messages for the three of them from Galadriel. This is what she had to say to Legolas. Legolas Greenleaf, long under tree, in joy thou hast lived, beware of the sea. If thou hearest the cry of the gull on the shore, thy heart shall then rest in the forest no more. Mysterious. But then Legolas does hear the cry of a seagull at Pelargir, and this happens. And now Legolas fell silent while the others talked, and he looked out against the sun, and as he gazed, he saw white seabirds beating up the river. Look, he cried, gulls. They are flying far inland. A wonder they are to me, and a trouble to my heart. Never in all my life had I met them until we came to Pelargir, and there I heard them crying in the air as we rode to the battle of the ships. Then I stood still, forgetting war in Middle-earth, for their wailing voices spoke to me of the sea. The sea. Alas, I have not yet beheld it, but deep in the hearts of all my kindred lies the sea longing, which it is perilous to stir. Alas for the gulls! No peace shall I have again under beech or under elm. As Legolas says, this is the fate of all elves, to feel that sea longing, to head west, to leave Middle-earth for the Undying Lands. But that shouldn't undermine the importance of the change in Legolas's life. He will now know no peace in the woodlands that he grew up in. Perhaps many writers would have left it like that in terms of character development. That's quite a big shift, after all, and would show Legolas, as he is presented, a representative of the elves, and experiencing a microcosm of the elvish experience, of loving Middle-earth and then getting a yearning to leave. But Tolkien adds in another layer, a new reason why he now doesn't want to go west. Not yet, anyway. He becomes firm friends with Gimli the dwarf. Their original distrust came from both racial and family enmities, but Gimli's clear admiration for the Lady Galadriel brought them closer. Legolas's openness to learn about the wonders of the glittering caves played its part, and they really bonded over a shared mutual interest: killing orcs at Helm's Deep. For the record, Gimli did win their little competition there. Sorry, Legolas fans. After the War of the Ring, the two of them travelled together as they had agreed through Fangorn Forest and the glittering caves of Aglarond, each showing each other what they loved and inspired them. But that's not all, because later Legolas brought elves with him and Gimli brought dwarves with him, and together they helped repair and improve Minas Tirith for humanity. The friendship of an elf and a dwarf helped to repair a millennia-old grudge between two races. And legend has it, when Aragorn died, the two of them travelled together westwards to Valinor. We know that part of the story so well we often gloss over it, but it bears repeating. In typical Tolkien fashion, he used Legolas to both create and live up to the stereotype of an elf, establishing him as a representative of all elves, and then subverted that stereotype. Elves keep to themselves in the forests, we know. Legolas did, but then he travelled to dwarven caves and spent years helping build a home for humanity. Elves hate and distrust dwarves. Legolas did, but then his greatest friend was a dwarf. Legolas is both a platonic template of an elf, and he isn't. He's an example of the otherworldly wonder of elves, their immortality, running across snowdrifts and shooting down Nazgul and their flying fell beasts in one shot. The end of his life in Middle-earth was heralded by that most humble of birds, the seagull. Yes, Legolas is a trope of an elf, but Tolkien invented that trope and subverted it within the space of one book. Almost every elf we see in almost every other high fantasy story after The Lord of the Rings is a homage to Legolas one way or another. Rarely has a character some decry as two-dimensional had such an impact on so many other stories. When you think of an elf in fantasy fiction, you think of Legolas. If you'd like to see more Lord of the Rings videos, please click on the link on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.